Welcome, everyone. My name is Christian Talbot. I am the president and CEO of the Middle States Association, and I am very happy to welcome you to our live chat with Tom Vander, whom I will introduce in just a moment. But as you know, this is part of our ongoing Changemakers in Education series of live chats. And this one is especially important because as school leaders, you are not just essential to, you actually truly set the terms of the conversation in education around what great learning looks like. And generative AI is one of what we consider to be one of the forces at play that is reshaping the landscape of education, and particularly is going to make or break this question of what great learning looks like. So I'm excited to have that conversation with Tom and to take your questions as well. For today, what will success look like? Well, hopefully by the time this live chat is over, you'll have a keener understanding of the leading edge of generative AI in schools and school systems. You'll have a better understanding of the connections between generative AI and this issue of reimagining what great learning looks like. And hopefully there will be some practical steps as well that you can take on your own after this is done. So let me introduce Tom, and then we'll get into our conversation. Tom Vander is the CEO of Getting Smart, through which he advises schools, districts, networks, foundations, learning organizations on the path forward. He's published several books, and this is not an exaggeration, literally thousands of articles and papers. Previously, he served as the first executive director of education for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I'm also very happy to say that Tom is a member of the Middle States AI advisory team. So Tom, thanks for being here today. I'm excited to talk.
Thanks, Christian.
So I want to start with this question of great learning and what it looks like, and just some context for the audience, because this was such a profound moment for me. But in the first meeting of our AI advisory team, I had started off the conversation by talking about integrating AI into schools, and you very thoughtfully suggested that we might want to shape our language differently, and you suggested that we should start asking what it would look like to reconsider what great learning looks like and how AI can support that. Can you talk a little bit about why that language shift feels so important?
Christian, it's great to be with you, and I really appreciate MSA and all the leaders that are part of your MSA community. So the slightly longer answer is that Christian, I spent 15 years in the private sector and going through waves of technology adoption, and it usually started as integrating technology into the old way that we did business, and we kept learning the lesson that before integrating, we should stop and reconsider what is it that we're doing. Is it still the best way to deliver value to our community, or does the new technology create a new set of possibilities that we should reconsider? And we're going to talk about technology integration in a little more detail, but one big reason that technology hasn't been super beneficial in the last 30 years is that we used it to automate old pedagogy. And the initial applications of artificial intelligence are following that same pattern, that we're automating worksheet creation. And so we can do some of the stuff that we used to do faster, but the real opportunity is to ask ourselves, what is this new opportunity that we're facing as a species? And as a result, reconsider, what should young people know and be able to do? And what are they able to do with these new tools? And as a result, what kinds of experiences should they have, and what kind of experiences can they create with these new tools? So two answers in short is I think you can and should begin integrating AI into teaching and learning while having this community conversation about a new set of possibilities, because longer term, we're facing the most extraordinary value creation opportunity in human history. And part of that's going to be around how human beings learn. And so maybe begin integrating, but be open to reinvention. I think that's the new mindset that we need, so that we don't miss the opportunity to really introduce new models of teaching and learning that work better for teachers and especially for learners.
Yeah. Tom, you said something that really jumps out at me that I want you to say a little bit more about. You said that in asking the question, what does great learning look like? It's an opportunity to think about what students are able to do and what they should know and could know. And that feels, integral to the portraits model that Getting Smart has done so much to advance. And you all recently put out a nice paper on a kind of set of concentric circles of portraits and how it's a kind of a new paradigm maybe for schools to think about, not just the question of what does great learning look like, but how do you actually get there? Can you talk a little bit more about that portraits model?
Yeah, when the world changes, it's a good time to reconsider our learning goals. And let's remember, we're 40 years into this information age, but we're about 14 months into this age of AI. So this is kind of a new and fresh question that a lot of us are pondering. Christian, I'm appreciative of the work that Charles Fidel and the Center for Curriculum Redesign has done. They have a new book that just came out last month called Education for the Age of AI. And that's really the first detailed reconsideration of a beautiful outcome framework Charles and the team introduced about 5 years ago. And I guess there's a couple of useful contributions there, Christian. One is what Charles calls a modern emphasis, and he goes through his knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and notes that there are some things that AI is really good at, and where it's going to help amplify us. That's in areas like communication and reasoning and problem solving, aspects of critical thinking, even aspects of creativity. But there are some things that AI is not good at and not likely to be good at in the near future. You could think of these as uniquely human skills that probably deserves a new emphasis, and that includes ethics and courage, a sense of fairness, collaboration, and particularly leadership, creativity, especially a sense of imagination, and most of all, Dr. Fidel would say adaptability. Adaptability is going to prove to be probably the most important skill set and mindset of this new era. So, in short, it's a good time to step back and have a community conversation about your learning goals. In that portrait model, we tried to reflect the current conversation that's happening, and I'm glad to see many school communities engaging in this conversation.
You said a few things that I want to tease out. First, for the audience, in the chat, we've posted the name of the book that Tom just referenced by Charles Fidel, Education for the Age of AI. In addition, there's a great podcast, Tom, that you recently published where you interviewed Charles, and I found it really compelling, especially around those things that you just mentioned. What are the uniquely human characteristics that we want to develop in our students? And they're particularly around questions of emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and even moral and ethical or virtues intelligence, if you will.
Yes.
An interesting connection that I'm just making now to one of our recent guests here at Middle States with these live chats, and that's Adam Bryant, who's an international expert in leadership and has been interviewing C-suite leaders for probably about 15, 16 years now. First through the New York Times Corner Office series that he started, and now through XCO. And he's written about this, and he talked about we have IQ, we have EQ, and he said, the next frontier for leadership is really AQ, or adaptability quotient.
Yeah.
And that really aligns, I think, with what you were just suggesting, and what Charles is suggesting is a really critical mindset. Tom, you said something else a few minutes ago that I also want you to go a little deeper into, and that is, in the history of technology adoption, we tend to integrate technology into the incumbent or existing ways of doing things. And you recently wrote an essay for the Hoover Institute. I think the essay is titled "Unfulfilled Promise," and it's about this roughly 40-year anniversary of A Nation at Risk. And in some ways, your essay is about the failure of the integration of technology to change student outcomes. Is it fair to say that that's essentially your primary conclusion, that roughly 4 decades of ed tech have not really moved the needle with student outcomes?
Christian, this is probably the most difficult thing that I've written, because I'm a tech optimist, and for 30 years I've been a champion of education technology and technology enhanced learning, and to write a paper that in its title acknowledges that it didn't really work as well as we hoped was a bitter pill. So let me say a couple things. One is, it's true when you look at the top line results around basic skills measured in traditional ways, you can't really detect scaled improvement. However, we could certainly observe improvement in many different schools and networks. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about where things improved and why they improved. It's also likely that we made substantial gains in important but harder to measure skills in creativity, critical thinking, communication. A very specific area that we could explore a little bit in a little bit more detail is just game-based learning and immersive learning, Sims, AR, VR. But now that half the globe is engaged in video games, and there's likely some improved in aggregate improvement in areas of intelligence as a result of those experiences, but we don't measure that very well. So yes, we didn't improve basic skills measured in traditional ways, but I suspect we made a good deal of progress in formal education in harder to measure areas, and maybe most important, created access for most human beings to new avenues of learning, especially in informal settings. Like in the last 20 years, YouTube has become the most important learning platform in the world, right? That now we've all figured out when you need to learn something, you Google it or you YouTube it. And so we in informal ways have created amazing opportunities to learn. And so it's not quite as bleak as nothing worked. Last thing I'll say is that I remain a champion of new school development. And when I look for bright spots over the last 30 years, it was really the schools formed over, let's say, over the last 20 years, formed around the opportunity of technology-enabled learning. And those schools and networks have proven to be very successful, in part at least, because the learning model incorporated access to technology and sort of an expanded view of learning opportunities.
I'm glad that your conclusions were not as bleak as I had originally worried. That last comment that you made reminds me of something that Thomas Arnett from the Christensen Center recently said, which is, I think it was maybe more of a provocation than a position, but he suggested on LinkedIn that it's impossible for existing schools to transform themselves, and that it's only through new school models and new school creation that we will see deep and meaningful change, which sounds at least congruent with what you were just suggesting.
It is. School transformation is really challenging, and the existing schools that accomplish transformation do so by incorporating many of the strategies of new school development. And so that I can think of a number of the international schools that we worked with that pioneered the future through things called Pathfinder spaces, where they would create the future in 4 or 5 blocks within their system and allow teams of teachers to step into the future in new spaces and teach in new ways with new tools, and to show the community what that looked like. And that those pioneering efforts, those small academies, those micro schools within a larger school, then helped flip the host to transform the entire school. But in some respects, that's an example of new school development inside an existing system. So however you can create those new conditions, I think it's useful. That's part of why I'm a big fan of micro schools, and I'm encouraging existing schools to start new schools sort of as a school then a school model, just so that they have a place to experiment, to test, and to use it as I said, as an illustration of what's possible.
Yeah. Our very first guest here at Middle States in these live chats was Michael Horn, and we were talking about his book, From Reopen to Reinvent, and that's very clearly one of the strategies he recommends: create a school within a school, or a kind of micro school that's adjacent to your school, as not as a skunks works. I mean, there's very clear proven practices to adopt there, but as a way to create a bridge to the future, as I think you were suggesting. Tom, when you think about all of the reasons why EdTech did not work in the last 30, 40 years, what has to be different this time around with generative AI?
Yeah. Well, those are really great questions. And I'm going to avoid that for a minute by acknowledging some of the really great comments in chat. Garrett talked about, didn't the world change during the pandemic? Didn't we reconsider learning goals? And Garrett, a few places did, but a lot of places didn't. We just flipped to a terrible version of existing school, but at a distance. And then when we went back in person, at least some of us in 2021, we did this thing called hybrid school, where it was like a bad version of traditional school with the kids on Zoom into the classroom. And so that would be an example of a missed opportunity to both reconsider learning goals and delivery strategies. A few cool models came out of the pandemic, but it unfortunately looks like, and Michael, you mentioned, that wrote a book called Reinventing, Reopen and Reinvent. It feels like we largely missed the reinvention opportunity. The majority of schools did anyway. So it's interesting to compare sort of the pandemic and AI. AI is, as fast as it's moved, it's a slower moving opportunity than the pandemic. The pandemic happened so suddenly that schools that were ready did okay, but most certainly struggled to adapt. What could be different, Christian, this time around? Um, Generative AI is a new form of technology, and we've been studying AI since 2015. In 2016 we launched a project called Ask About AI because we became convicted that it would soon transform every sector of society. And even though we were closely monitoring its development, we didn't really see Gen AI. We didn't see that before it happened, and in part because it's a new technology. These are reasoning engines. These are creation engines, number one, and number two, the UI, the interface is natural language. And those are two really fundamental breakthroughs simultaneously, that we have access to these reasoning engines via natural language. And those developments create a very different opportunity set than we've ever seen. And let me be clear that I feel super paradoxical about this. I am completely freaked out by the catastrophic risk factors that we face. I'm as scared as I am excited about the possibilities. So don't, for a minute, get me wrong, that I see this. I hope in an eyes wide open opportunity space, and I'm as committed to dealing with safety and security as I am the opportunity. That's one thing I really appreciate about the Rails framework, that it's really thoughtful about the opportunity, and it's cautious. It's appropriately cautious about the risk factors. So that's number one, Christian. That this is new and different and powerful. As I said before, this is the kids that are in high school today, Generation AI, have the greatest value creation opportunity of any people ever born. They have a set of tools. And this point number two is access is here. It's widespread, which compared to EdTech, think of EdTech in the last 40 years, we had to fight every step to get devices to kids and broadband to schools, and we thought it was pretty good by 2019. And then the pandemic happened and we found out it wasn't as good as we thought it was. And then there's 20 million American households that didn't have very good broadband. So the access battle was long and difficult, and is still not over, but we're starting from a platform where most kids and families have access to tools and broadband sufficient to step into the age of AI. So that's number one. This is new and different and powerful. Number two, we have a platform to access that is really exciting. And then just number three, the opportunity in both formal learning and informal learning is I think really exciting, and that will surface in back to our earlier conversation. In some ways, it'll surface as improvements to the current system. I think of things like tutoring. Tutoring is going to be proven to be quite effective in both language and mathematics, I believe. Some aspects of teacher assistance, of automating some portions of the teaching tasks that are challenging. It'll help by providing a lot more high quality performance feedback to learners as well as to teachers. But the biggest opportunity in high school and college is going to be learners using these creation engines to express themselves in text and code and video and audio in ways that we couldn't imagine, and in doing so to add value to their community. And so the big shift to me is that education for 1,000 years has been about preparing to be productive in the future. And we now have this really unique opportunity, particularly in high school and college, to invite learners into value creation, where we can invite them into community connected projects and entrepreneurial experiences where they're not just talking about getting ready to add value, but actually stepping into value creation. And I think that's really exciting from the standpoint that schools can suddenly be a value creator for their community, that young people can be a value creator for their community. It sort of changes how we think about partnerships, right? And so instead of us asking for things in our community, we can say, how can we serve you? How can we create value for you as a community? And I'm really excited about that. There are a lot of questions I have about how that will all work, but the number of schools that are now engaging in client-connected projects and entrepreneurships and slowly incorporating AI into that feels like something new and big and really important.
I want to say just a word about your feelings of caution, and then piggyback more on the positive side that you just expressed at the conclusion. But this morning I was with probably about 40 teachers of pre-K, primary school, and middle school. And I said to them, what you and I have talked about before, what you were just gesturing at a moment ago, I have profound concerns about the ways in which uh, there's a risk that um, the simulation of intimacy, the simulation of social emotional relationships, for kids who are often at an age when they have a hard time distinguishing between what's real and what's not real, is a real profound challenge for us. And I told these teachers this morning that they are on the very front lines of that issue, that what they choose to do with their students and AI, whether it's just helping the teachers to design things in the background, or if they're going to bring it into the classroom, ultimately the teachers are going to be the ones who are the most directly in contact with this question of the social, emotional, and even moral, ethical development of young people who are at the most formational moment in their lives. Like this is when they become who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. And the fact that kids already interact um, with AIs on, character.ai or on Snap or in synthetic social networks, and either don't know, or maybe it doesn't even matter to them that some of these people are real and some of them are machines, I think is it's a really difficult question. And I know, Tom, you're concerned about other safety issues too, but for me, as someone who spent a long time in the classroom, that's the thing that I probably spend the most time worrying about.
I'm
But
smiling, Christian, because the first time we talked, I told you I was freaked out about drone strikes and
drones, yeah.
autonomous weapons, and there's a lot to be concerned about, right? And this has been sort of a creeping crisis in the way that social media has infected our culture and our kids in a there's these creeping risks of AI as well as the catastrophic risks, and so let's not for a minute downplay that. Ardrina has asked a super challenging comment in chat, and she said she thinks AI will stunt inquiry, student critical thinking, and writing skills. So that's a disaster if that is true. And unfortunately, I think it will be true in some places that that go the straight integration route. of incorporating tools and not being mindful about their goals. I think the opposite is quite possible, but probably only if we're intentional about it. I actually think AI can improve critical thinking and inquiry. I used this example yesterday. 2 years ago, we've raised a generation of kids to Google and answer, right? And so you put in a query and you get a response, and it's a transactional model. What I think Ethan Mollick at Wharton is teaching us, and he's doing the most interesting work in higher education, and certainly for me, reconceptualize how we can teach entrepreneurship. But Ethan has pointed out that this model is one that benefits from dialogue. So there's actually an opportunity to teach dialogue because it's in being in conversation of asking better and better prompts. We are able to produce more and better than we ever thought we could. And so I'll admit that on the writing front, that may shift the set of skills from completely from creation to more emphasis on editing and curating. I think there still is high value in some writing that occurs offline and then may go through an edit process, and some writing that is done as full creation. So I do think, and we're 14 or 15 months into figuring out what it means to learn with AI, but I do think we need to be intentional about the skills that we're teaching and incorporate AI in ways that benefit those skills. Let me complicate this dialogue just a little bit. Conmigo is the new learning assistant from Khan Academy, and I'm generally bullish on that and appreciative of Sal Khan's leadership there, and I think it'll be a pretty good tool. However, my first exposure to that tool was watching 7th and 8th graders use it to learn hand calculation in solving an equation, and then watching some other kids factor a polynomial. I now believe that more than a third of what we teach in secondary mathematics is irrelevant. That our focus on hand calculation is, I think, a relic of a different era. And I just talked to Conrad Wolfram yesterday when I was in AI, and Conrad is probably the leading advocate in the world for teaching mathematics as if computers existed. And so I think we need a full reconsideration of what being mathematically literate means. And I no longer believe that teaching long division is useful. And I think I no longer believe that, other than knowing that you can factor a polynomial, that doing so is terribly useful. I am very interested in algebraic reasoning and mathematical modeling, and in data analysis and all of statistics and probability. But Christian, that would be an example of where I think we need a global reconsideration of learning goals. We need to update what we think is important, and then be really intentional about learning experiences. But I appreciate these concerns, and I am afraid that in some places we will stunt inquiry, critical thinking, and writing skills if we're not intentional.
Yeah, and to follow through on that if that you just expressed, Tom. You mentioned earlier Rail, and for those in the audience who aren't yet familiar with it, Rail stands for Responsible AI and Learning, and it's something that we announced here at Middle States on Monday. It's going to be a series of endorsements that collectively constitute an implementation framework for AI in schools. And the first one is AI literacy, safety, and ethics. And if you go to the website to check out Rail, you'll see that one of the things that is required of participants in that program is revisiting mission statement, vision statement, portrait of a graduate in light of a world of abundant AI. And if we don't ask those questions first, I worry that we run the risk of merely reproducing what we've done before. But by pausing, and that's the if that you said, if we pause, if we rethink, if we reimagine, what does that graduate need to look like in this world of abundant AI? That I think we're creating the conditions for us to have different and better learning experiences, as you said, Tom, opportunities for kids to add real value, like substantive material value to their own communities, into the wider world. We could probably go further down the rabbit hole, but I want to ask you, really for the benefit of the audience, when it comes to this question of what great learning looks like, and maybe even how some are using AI to get there, who are you following closely? You already mentioned Charles Fidel. We have in common on the AI advisory team Amanda Bickerstaff at AI for Education. I think she's produced some really great work on this front. But who else do you look to on this question of what great learning looks like and how AI can get us there?
Thanks for mentioning Amanda. And AI for Education. I'll stress again, Ethan Mullock. I'd encourage everybody to sign up for his Substack newsletter. It comes out once a week. It's just he and his wife are doing such important and thoughtful work. I just sort of view his report as this weekly report from the front lines of people, fully reconsidering higher education. So his work is really important. There's a handful of people in education that are scrambling to try to, inform community conversations. Alex Cotrain at AI EDU, Saba Kidway at Designing Schools is doing great work in Orange County and in Southern California, helping to lead the dialogue. I appreciate that the alphabet soup of code and ISTE, have come together around Teach AI and are trying to provide thoughtful guidance. I would add COSIN to that list. That's the tech directors from schools and districts. So a lot of people scrambling to try to understand what's happening and provide guidance. And Christian, I appreciate how MSA has quickly and thoughtfully stepped into this space, and I really appreciate the framework that you've created. I think it's an example of a really thoughtful guidance for schools.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for.
There have been a number of questions about elementary grades, and Christian, I'll admit to having spent more time thinking about secondary and post-secondary applications. I have less well-developed views of what powerful learning looks like in elementary school. I'm not opposed to Waldorf schools, and I'm going to go visit a forest school in my hometown next week. I'm a deep believer in place-based learning and authentic community connected learning. And I think that's as important as ever. And yes, there's ways that we can augment and supplement that with some smart tutoring, but I'm I'm an experientialist and think that still has really, really high value, especially in K-8.
I totally agree. Uh, you mentioned a number of people. I'll add one to the list, and that's Dan Meyer, who also has a weekly Substack. Just really thoughtful, former classroom teacher. He's the kind of person I wish I had had as a math teacher when I was
It,
in.
I find his work challenging quite often, and we don't always agree, but I agree that I appreciate his thoughtfulness. His arguments are always well reasoned and articulated.
Yep, precisely the reason I like him too. I don't always agree with him, but he always makes me think pretty hard. That's a bunch of mostly individuals, some nonprofits as well. Tom, are there any schools that you think are starting to do things? I know it's still early days, but
Yeah.
are there schools or systems that you would suggest people turn to?
One unlikely one is I was just on a call where we had and invited Rachel McLean from Collegiate EduNation. It's edu um, edu-nation.org. So it started as a network of 13 or 14 very rural schools in Texas, and they're expanding to Indiana and Kentucky, West Virginia. They've helped these little rural schools develop a P-TECH model, which I'm really excited about, which combines dual enrollment pathways at the high school level with work-based learning. So they're in both physical and virtual partnerships, creating these applied, accelerated, supported pathways for young people. And I just appreciate their entrepreneurship and the way that that they help each other cobble together kind of a next generation model for really rural communities. And they just announced in the show we were doing together that they're incorporating AI into their platform in terms of a teacher assistant, student assistant, a tutoring model, and they hope to add some project supports. So I really appreciate the pluck of that network. Our friends in Cajon Valley, this is really income East San Diego County, are doing really cool things with Schooljoy. I think it's schooljoy.com. Um, in particular, they're doing career exploration where students can have dialogues with real people on Pathful and future people on Schooljoy. So they really take this engage a pro seriously, and they engage real people and career avatars and help kids imagine possible futures in a really, really thoughtful way. Um, just up the street in Los Angeles, there's Da Vinci Schools. I met with them a couple days ago. They've developed Project Leo.net. There's about 1,300 high school students in that network, and they all are using um, GPT-4 to co-construct community-connected projects. And Christian, for high school students, what I most want are I want more students doing more work that matters to them and to their community. And when you can use a tool like AI to express your own needs, and where the teacher can say you have some learning needs in this space, and you can say I have strengths and interest in this area, and then you can connect with a community partner that can help you frame up a project that can both help you work on stuff that you're interested in while building the skills that you need to while adding value to the community. That's a very cool application of AI to do really high quality projects that invite kids to deliver value to the community. It's super relevant, it's challenging, it's rigorous. So I'm really excited about that example. That's my short list.
Well, you've already begun to anticipate my last question, and then we have some questions from the chat that I also want to put your way. You've described yourself as belonging to the Profound Possibilities camp, and what are just some practical steps that you would recommend to school leaders today to take steps in the direction of profound possibilities, even if those profound possibilities aren't going to happen today or tomorrow, but they
Yeah.
might be months or years away?
Um, we we've had so many really good comments in chat as well. Let me just say that yesterday I was with Julia Freeland Fisher at South by, and many of you know that she's really the leading advocate of social capital, and we really appreciate her work, and she's helped us add that to our list of outcomes that schools should include helping kids leave not only with a sense of purpose and skills, but with a social network. And she's actually she was surprisingly worried about relationship development and what that means with AI. And so um, I guess last week I would have put sort of relationship skills in this category of profound possibilities. I'm going to keep thinking about that, keep studying that, but I think there's an opportunity to develop relationship skills and to improve student supports in schools, better early warning systems, better practice opportunities. Anyway, you've heard about the other opportunities I'm excited about, and just in terms of value creation. But where to start? I was at Cascades Academy in Bend, Oregon, right before the holiday break, and helped them organize a community conversation about AI. And I think that's a really a good example of a next step that's really important right now to invite your community into this opportunity. But well, I would say invite the opportunity to both describe the possibilities they're excited about, but also express the concerns, many of which have been expressed in chat today. I think it's super important for us to, as ed leaders now, to be conversation leaders and to begin building a set of temporary agreements around, because these tools are moving so fast. Like for adaptability's sake, I think we have to think in terms of a set of temporary agreements about what kids need to know, what kind of learning experiences we value, what kind of safeguards we want to put in place so that we can keep moving, but doing so in community. So get started, but do it with your community. Identify the teacher leaders that are ready to and interested in moving more quickly, support their efforts, within community agreements. Be safe and sane, but aggressive about exploring the possibilities. Use micro schools and school into school strategies to sort of partition efforts that feel more aggressive than the rest of your faculty or community are ready to step into.
Those are all great suggestions.
Here's another one that I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but I think it's a really good idea. So I'm going to keep suggesting it till I find it. When a lot of us were going one-to-one, in the 90s and noughts, we developed student ed tech support crews, where 12 to 20 students would help teachers deploy and support and maintain technology, and even improve instruction. And I know my daughter, who leads Getting Smart, was part of that. She was in one of the first one-to-one programs starting in 1995, and that was a really important leadership role for her. She also had the benefit of really great teachers that were sort of rethinking project-based learning. But you can and should do the same thing with AI. Find 12 to 20 kids on your campus and make them an AI leadership cadre that can help other students and teachers sprint to literacy. Christian, now that's the last suggestion. Is I do think even if you're really cautious about what's going on, you owe it to everyone on campus, all your teachers and all your students, at least need a basic level of AI literacy to understand what this is and what it's not, and what it's useful for, and what the cautions are around its use. And so, Christian, that's what I appreciate about the Rails framework. Really starts with AI literacy as a foundation. I think this is a new equity issue that I don't think you should let a high school student graduate in May without at least a basic level of AI literacy. I think we owe that to them. So start with that. Even that could be maybe the first outcome of your first community conversation, is an agreement to sprint to a shared level of AI literacy.
Mm. That comment, Tom, that you just made about equity is an echo of our previous guest, our last guest. We had Chris Emden on, and Chris said that withholding a technology from someone that has the power to change their lives is a criminal act. And so he's going, to the extreme of the equity issue, but I don't think he's wrong. I think that there is something about generative AI that does have the power to transform the lives of individuals and communities, and so we have a responsibility as educators to empower people, starting with literacy, safety, and ethics, and then moving from there. I do want to ask just a couple of questions from the chat section. Sorry, Bacon, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sorry. Said that we're considering opening an AI-centered elementary school rather. Any suggestions as to where we can go for research and support?
She also said, "What's an experientialist?" And I guess I believe in the power of place-based learning and experiential learning. Sorry, call that what you will. I'm maybe a constructivist, if that helps, but I believe in the power of project-based learning and place-based learning, immersive experiences. So the first question was where to start with that, Christian?
In particular, where to go for research and support?
Well, MSA is now a good spot with the Rails framework. I guess we covered a couple of them. Amanda's site, AI for Education, has some great resources. Alex's site, AIEDU.org, they're supporting a lot of schools and networks around the country now with pretty good resources. Teach AI is not moving quickly, teachai.org, but there is some useful policy guidance up on that site. I don't know, Christian, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, well, it's the exact conversation I was having this morning with teachers from St. Anne's in Delaware, and I think the AI for Education prompt library, which I think is now 300 or 400 prompts large, includes prompts around elementary education, special education. We had a conversation this morning about how to design lessons and assessments for classrooms with, significant needs for differentiation, with a significant number of neurodivergent learners. And, I would say AI for Education is the place I would go for sure. And then in terms of an implementation framework, yes, Tom, I agree with you that Middle States' Rail project is it's really the only thing that I've seen out there, which is kind of hard to believe when it comes to implementation framework, but we're glad to offer it to folks. There's another really good question, Tom, around this question of community agreements. So John Armajani said formal discussions around standards, ethics, and the implications around AI in society are way behind the beast and the beast of use and implementation of AI. So how can we in the education community get ahead of this trend so that we can hold space for these important and meaningful conversations to ensure we have standards around AI before it's implemented in the classroom?
Well, it's a good question. It's hard and it's super context dependent. So the answer is different if you're an independent school than if you're a school in a within a school district and state um, context. So that matters. Obviously, easier to move farther, faster in a independent setting than it is in a state, especially those some that came out with really bad guidance early on. Um, I do think it's useful to develop school or system use policy. So some people have decided to just update their current acceptable use policy as opposed to doing a new one. The Peninsula School District in Washington is a great example of that. And they did it with a set of design principles around UDL that are really thoughtful. They started with this is what we believe about powerful learning, teaching and learning. And within that context, here's what we believe about AI. And then they made some suggestions for how teachers might incorporate it. Most schools right now are defaulting to a teacher decision around use, that it's basically banned unless a teacher uses it and partitions how and when and where it's used. I think that's unfortunate, but that's where most people are starting today. If you do that, at least combine it with a commitment to literacy, because I think just no, unless there's a teacher leadership is the wrong answer. If it's no plus AI literacy, that's a little bit better. And then begin a study group around the longer term applications, and then begin adopting common tools, strategies, and practices by grade span, right? Because they're going to be quite a bit different in upper division of high school than they will in fifth or sixth grade. So I hope that by next year that most schools could have thoughtful high school policy where there's not just left to teacher permission, but where there's an expectation that every student will be engaged in at least one community connected AI enhanced project each year of high school, or at least for the last couple of years of high school. So that would be an example of sort of moving towards a common expectation that makes sure that every student has some access to AI enhanced learning.
Those are all great recommendations. Tom, I'm going to end with only three of the many, many things I've taken notes on from what you've said, but the three things that are most standing out for me from this conversation are that generative AI has created a kind of maybe once in a lifetime opportunity for kids to create value for themselves, for their community by doing learning and by doing work that matters. That's number one. Number two, in order to make that happen, we need to rethink the relationship and the partnership between a school and its community. And number three, all of this probably begins with community conversations, starting with some at least temporary agreements about what we want kids to know and do and have safeguards in place, and to keep coming back to that essential question, what does great learning look like? Tom, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I always
Thanks,
value your
Christian, and thanks to everybody that's on board and in the chat. Super great, thoughtful, probing, challenging questions. So I appreciate that about the community.
awesome. Thanks again, and we'll see everybody next, actually in a couple of weeks at our next live chat.